Interesting. Okay. I guess last question for you. Let's talk about emerging markets for a moment. Do you think the rush of capital into markets like the BRIC nations is justified? And what can investors do to guard against the risk of these growing, less stable markets?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've had some experience in these markets, good and bad. I've run an emerging market fund, and I've been investing in places like China since 2007 through the securities markets. And what I would say is that really was the huge opportunity after the global financial crisis, is that the emerging markets bounced back much more quickly, or much more resilient. But I think a lot of that game has played out. I think the opportunities are actually in places like Europe and actually the developed world right now. And that's because the emerging markets are starting to really hit full capacity. They're starting to get some inflation issues. Real estate valuations have improved tremendously, and there's less value in those markets. So from a more medium-term view, a little less positive on those markets, although I think the long-term structural outlook is tremendous. And from a strategic standpoint, would look to continue to be a buyer in some of those markets, but you have to be selective. Now, I think China's a very hard place to make money. I often joke there's a lot of people making money in China except for me, it seems. A place like Brazil, on the other hand, I think has a much more transparent, developed economy, has a much more sensible monetary policy, and is a place where you can make money long term. But you have to be cautious. You can't tar every emerging market with the same brush. They are very, very different.
Obviously, two that you didn't mention in there from BRIC, you mentioned right. Brazil and China. Russia and India, are those areas that you'll look?
Yeah, you know what, I think Russia's challenging just from the transparency issues that surround Russia in general, and frankly it's a lot worse when you're talking about real estate. There's a lot of politicians' hands in all kinds of part of the real estate market. So that's a place where I've just been very wary of and found it hard to make money, frankly. India has a tremendous opportunity to be the next China. And I've invested there, and part of the issue there though is finding the right people to manage your money. In emerging markets, there's plenty of growth around, there's plenty of wealth being created. The biggest single challenge that I face as an investor of capital is finding people who are not only competent, but aligned in terms of making me money. And unfortunately, a lot of the real estate securities companies in places like India are not quite there yet. Mm-hmm. But that's okay. It's very early days. We're seeing the proliferation of REITs globally, and I'm sure it's a matter of time before we're going to get those right kind of opportunities in places like India too.
That's very interesting. Scott, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Andrew Benioff for the Llenrock blog on llenrock.com. Thanks for joining us.